For centuries, millions of people from across the globe have come to the United States seeking the opportunity for a better life. America is a country that was built by immigrants, some who brought their talent and others who found themselves while pursuing their dreams in a new land. Here is one story about the life of a modern-day immigrant.
Hi, I'm Jacob Khurgin. I'm a urologist currently in Brooklyn, and I want to tell you a little bit about my life, how I got here. I grew up actually in Israel, but I was born in Manhattan, Beth Israel Hospital, Lower Manhattan. I think it's now part of Mount Sinai. And I don't remember any of that, obviously, because I was just born. But about 2 or 3 months later, my family took me back to Israel, which is where they were living. A little strange as to why I was born in New York City, whereas my whole childhood, everything I can remember was in Israel. It has to do a little bit with my grandma, who was a big part of my life. Babushka, Safta, I used to call her. She had a lot of foresight in general in her whole life, and a lot of strong will. And one of the things that she thought was, even though she's a big lover and supporter of Israel where we lived, she wanted to make sure that her grandson, me, would be able to leave Israel if needed and have citizenship elsewhere and have, the absolute necessity to serve in the Israeli army, the Tzahal, would be an option rather than mandatory. So there I am, the only family member to date that was born in Israel. That was born in America. I was an American citizen from the beginning, and an ongoing joke in my life was, Jacob, Yasha, he can be president. Back then, it was a big deal to be president. Now it seems anybody can be. Anyway, so my whole life, my whole formative time, I grew up in Israel, in Haifa, which, for those who don't know, the biggest cities are Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and the third biggest is Haifa. It's a very beautiful city. Obviously, I'm nostalgic about it, but it has mountains on one side, it has the beach on the other side, and my childhood till age 5, 6 or so was very uneventful. I remember things very fondly. I spoke Hebrew. That was my first language. And our family was my dad, my mother, my older sister, and me. We also had a dog, Gypsy, big German Shepherd. I don't have a lot of memories of her, but I do have memories. I would walk into the room, and the big dog didn't really like me because we would go on walks as a family, and I would always get plopped on her back because I was small and tired, and she would have to carry me like a horse. So most of my memories are walking into a room, and sure enough, she's slinking out of the room, trying to avoid me. So my dad, Boris Khurgin, grew up in Russia and born in Leningrad, lived mostly in Moscow, and him together with his mom, my grandma, Babushka Sara, they basically escaped from the former Soviet Union to Poland, to Austria, to Italy, and eventually to Haifa. And that was in 1959, which was definitely before there was a big migration to Israel from Russia and the Soviet Union. From the Soviet Union, there weren't a lot of people coming to Israel, so they were there, pretty early, with all the difficulties associated with that. But he was 18 at the time and became an, early Israeli. And in 1973, I think, is when he met my mother. Her name is Marina Rabinovich, if you're in America. She was from Ukraine, somewhere in Kiev. Also came with her parents about 14, 15 years after my dad. They met. It was not love at first sight, from what I can tell. But my grandma, who said, she comes from a good family. You should, meet her again. Anyway, so they met again and ended up getting married. A short time later, my sister, Rachel, was born. She's 5 years older than me. She's still my sister. I'm very close with her. And that was a family. It was lovely. I remember our apartment. You come in, I had a bedroom, she had a bedroom. We had a little balcony where our dog would run around. We had a big tree, a palm tree, and we would eat dates from it once in a while. And then Haifa is a very beautiful town where we were on HaCarmel, which is Mount Carmel, and you could overlook the Gulf of Haifa. It was about 10, 15-minute walk from the Baha'i Gardens. It was really a beautiful place, and most of my childhood memories are just playing outside. We'd go outside, play with the neighborhood kids. You don't have much of a plan, but before you know it, it's dark. It's evening, it's time to go home. But one of my best friends was in Bal Brenner. I remember her. I actually reconnected with her recently. She's a psychologist living in Israel. I remember we would play games where we would take giant leaves and kind of fashion them into a bowl, put little other leaves and flowers in it and say we've made a salad or some sort of delicious meal for everybody to enjoy. So things like that were fairly simple, happy childhood. On Rehov David Marcus, I remember that, the name of the street. I actually came back 30-something years later when I became a dad to show my older son, Sebastian, where I grew up. It was a very touching moment for me. We even knocked on the door to the old apartment and introduced ourselves, said, "Hi, I used to live here a long time ago. Is it okay if I looked around?" And these kids, probably not the best judgment, but they opened the door and I was able to show Sebastian, I used to sleep here. This was the backyard. Here's the palm trees and the dates that we ate there. But everything changed, as it does in life. Around age 6 years old, I remember having a very serious conversation with my dad. Turned out my parents were getting divorced, and no divorce is perfectly beautiful and congenial, but this was not a very friendly divorce. And within the span of a year, maybe two, we moved from my home there at David Marcus Street to Rehov Zamenhof, which was another street where my grandma lived with her for a little bit, and the divorce was finalizing. We were living with my dad and my grandma and my sister, and before you know it, we were moving to America. Initially, we were going to move as part of my dad's sabbatical for a year or two, and that was in 1987, and I've only lived in America since then, so it was not quite a sabbatical. And now that I've arrived in America, I'm going to wear American clothes, not the IDF, the Tzahal t-shirt, and I'll say a little bit more about that. So here I am, about 8 years old, almost finished second grade, didn't quite finish it. I don't speak any language except Hebrew. I understand a little bit of Russian, just from spying on my parents and grandparents. And we came to America. This is 1987 New York, for those who were around. This is not the Disney-fied bright lights of New York. This is a gritty New York from like Taxi Driver and other Scorsese films. It was definitely a culture shock. I remember coming from the airport to Manhattan to the Upper West Side where we were going to live, and just seeing crazy things everywhere, like people of every different nationality, a language that was completely foreign to me. I remember seeing the staircases on the outside of the apartments and thinking, wow, the Americans are really stupid. We usually build the stairs inside the building. And I remember a squeegee guy attacking us in the car and squeegeeing and dirtying up the windshield wiper. That was my first few hours in America. When you get to a new place, your identity changes. So in Israel, we were kind of Russians, I guess. In America, we were Jews, Israelis. And it makes you kind of question who you are and what you are and where you belong. And that's when I started thinking a little bit more about, the family history and who's from what and from where and for what reason. My dad's dad, who I never met, and his name is Jacob. That's who I was named after. He was a physicist. He worked in Russia, the former Soviet Union. A lot of what took place is obviously not always out in the open, but best we can tell, he was a physicist who worked probably on the nuclear program in Russia in the sort of formative years leading up to World War II. Around 1943, when my dad was 2 years old, he died. How did he die? We're not sure. The story was he got mercury poisoning. Another story was that he got appendicitis and died from that. And the more we've looked into it a little bit, the more we think that maybe he probably died from radiation poisoning, which was not really a well-known thing back then. And it's related to what he was doing. My dad explained it to me that my dad's a physicist. I don't understand, but it has something to do with building the accelerator. And he did important work for that, probably predated some English physicists that did it. This is the best understanding I have of that. So that was my dad's dad. My dad grew up without a dad since 2 years old. I think that was a big hole in his heart forever. I've appreciated how difficult that must have been the older I got and when I became a father. So my dad grew up without that. My dad's grandma, babushka, Sarah, my grandma, was a very strong personality and kind of took the role of two parents, maybe three or four parents, depending who you ask. So my grandma, which really from the age of 6 until her death in 2012, was the closest thing I had to a mother figure. And I remember her very fondly. She was definitely a matriarch. She was born Sarah Freilich, which is a Yiddish word for some sort of dance, like a happy dance, a joyous dance. She grew up in Odessa, and being an Odessitka, has a very unique sense of humor and a very specific culture to Odessa that sort of remains to this day, and you can see it in Brighton Beach here in Brooklyn, and still exists quite a bit. She was rebellious. She started her life as a very, very fervent communist. She was very much about, the party, and would give lectures and talks, and over time became more and more disillusioned with communism, seeing what it was like, facing anti-Semitism, and that eventually led to her leaving the former Soviet Union in 1959. But there was a period of about, 15, 16 years where she was a widow, living hard. The World War II was raging, and everybody was starving and having all these horrible things that I never experienced. And she made it through it, and she married a Polish guy for money, which allowed her to leave the former Soviet Union with him, because she was married to a Polish citizen. And she took my dad along and left from Russia to Poland, and then from there it was much easier to escape, and she escaped to Austria. There's a family legend that when they were in Austria, because she spoke Yiddish, she would speak Yiddish everywhere, and people understood her even though they didn't like the fact that she was speaking Yiddish and not German. But it was close enough that she was able to get around. So I think she knew what difficulties there were being in the former Soviet Union, and was very much always forward thinking on how to get her son and then her grandchildren to a better place in life. And initially that was Israel, and eventually to America. So you only realize the weight of the past when you get older. But I do remember having a hard time in third grade, not knowing the language, not really understanding who I am in comparison to everybody else. But what I remember was not speaking a word. I think we came around May or June, and my grandma, with her broken English, taught me English from, the Cat in the Hat and things like that. So by the time I entered third grade, I spoke very little, just like my grandma. But at that age, you integrate pretty fast. I remember not saying a word for, a few weeks. And then about 2 or 3 months after starting third grade, English just came pretty naturally. And I actually remember a few months after that, I had my first dream in English. I don't remember what it was about, but I remember thinking that my brain has changed. I'm no longer, Hebrew thinking, dreaming. It was English, the primary language. And I remember towards the beginning of my third grade, we had a spelling bee. And so all the kids participated, and sure enough, I had to participate as well. And I remember winning the spelling bee, a few months after arriving. I remember to this day, the winning word was juice, Juice. The big part of my learning the language was, reading the back of cereal boxes and juice boxes and milk and things like that. And juice was one of the words I knew. So, it was, at first, my older sister, Rachel, she took it harder coming to America from Israel, because she had a lot of friends, and she was about 12 years old, a more difficult age, I guess, than being 7 or 8. And we used to speak Hebrew to each other and make promises that we would always move back there. And, that never happened, but the link and the desire to go back became a little bit thinner and weaker over the years. And soon enough, we were Americanized. It's not a bad thing, it's just a change. Initially, we didn't have a lot of money. We had a nice apartment on the Upper West Side, but Dad, with his very respectable education, he was a physicist, top-notch physicist. He ran a big department in the weapons development in Israel. He had a hard time. He spoke English well, but there was an accent. He was older. He could not get any job. I remember he was trying to get anything and everything possible. He was going to be a cab driver for a while, and he was starting different businesses. It was a stressful time. So I remember feeling that I just need not to contribute to any problems and be a good kid, if you will. And I was, and I really was a good student, never got in trouble. Third and fourth grade were my first exposure to the American education system. I remember struggling a little bit with the English, but the math, for example, I remember very, very well that until maybe fifth or sixth grade in America, we didn't reach the level of what I learned in Israel until the end of second grade. So math was always a strong suit for me. I remember soon after starting in third grade, whenever we had math class, they would take me and put me outside the class and gave me my own coursework to do because I was more advanced than the other kids. And sure enough, after a little while, another kid joined me who became a very good friend. His name is Paris Pender. And he joined me. We would sit there, we would laugh and crack jokes and do some math together. We ended up being friends until high school, pretty much. And ironically, I think I was a little bit better at math than him. And ironically, he became a mathematician. He's, I don't know exactly what math he does, but he became a mathematician years later. When I ran into him, I found out. So third and fourth grade, that's where I was. My dad, I think, was pretty lonely. You feel out of sorts. Long story short, he met a woman, Oksana Yablonskaya. So just to backtrack a little bit, my sister was a very good pianist and cellist. She was very talented musically. I was a little talented musically, not as much, but I used to play piano. And we used to go to Tatulian. Liana Tatulian. She was our teacher. We would go up to Washington Heights. We would drive there. And first, Rachel would have a lesson, and I would have a lesson. And at some point, Elena invited her friend Oksana, who was actually the head of the piano department at Juilliard. And her and my dad hit it off. And long story short, we moved to Ardsley, where Oksana was living. Ardsley, Westchester, about, 30, 60 minutes north of New York, depending on the traffic. And we lived there for a year. I was living in Westchester, in the suburbs. I remember we had a dog, Filu, very stubborn, cute Cocker Spaniel. So I would spend most of my time in school, and after school I would just be alone in the backyard playing with my dog and pretending I was a Ninja Turtle or something with some of the sticks I would find. And that was a peaceful year, I guess. But again, it ended a little bit surprisingly for me. Everybody seemed to get along with Oksana, is what I thought. And it turned out only I was really getting along with her. And her and my dad and her and my sister really butted heads quite a bit. So about a year after being there, we moved to the Upper West Side again. And Oksana left our life. She was the last person I remember thinking of as a replacement for my mother. someone who would actually be my mother. I knew that my grandma was a mother figure, but she wasn't my mother, and other people. And at that point, I remember thinking, okay, I don't have a mother per se, but that's okay. And we moved back to Manhattan and lived there pretty much for the next couple of decades. I went to Columbus Academy, junior high school. I did well. I never got in trouble, really, and then passed the test to go into a specialized science high school, Stuyvesant, which I spent, 9th, 10th, 11th grade, and 12th grade from. It was a good school. There was a lot of smart people, a lot of hardworking people, a lot of combination of both, and I did well there. Ended up being accepted to Columbia University in Manhattan as well, and started going there. And I think around this age was when me being a non-problem child and having no real issues kind of stopped. I had some sort of crisis, and long story short, again, I met a lady 7 years older than me. Her name is Sofia Murashkovskaya. She was a sort of family friend, but we got into a relationship, and actually I ended up getting married around age 19. It was never a good marriage, but it was definitely a learning experience. We lived together, and it was, wild ups and very low lows. And around age almost 21 was when we got divorced. I do remember that was the only time that I ever went to the former Soviet Union. Her and her family were living part of the time in Moscow. I went to visit there. This is Moscow in the late 90s. It was a strange place. I did not really like it. Maybe it was because I was in a bad marriage, but also because I remember seeing very expensive cars and people wearing expensive clothes on one side of the street. On the other side of the street, you would see little babushkas who obviously had no money. They were selling some sort of snacks on the street just to make ends meet. It was a strange place, and that's the only time I've ever been to Russia. I probably should go back, but maybe only if Putin lets me. Not right now, probably. So the marriage eventually ended. I had a big depressive time in my life, which I snapped out of eventually. I took my time to finish college, and I think I did something very smart, which was I would work a lot doing computer operating, which is basically in an investment bank. I would work and make things look pretty on presentations for investment bankers, which paid pretty well. I would do overtime, make as much money as I could, and then I would spend it traveling. Initially, I went to Europe all over. I went to New Zealand. I went to South America. I got to see a good chunk of the world. I had a feeling that I would eventually come back and settle down and not be a world traveler. So I was using my time to do that, and had a lot of great memories. It's funny because when you're recalling things in your life, you don't necessarily recall it in the same order that it happened. You don't necessarily recall everything like the clock. 1 year may be eventful in your life, another year not so much. There's a thing called a homunculus, which is the way the brain perceives our body. So, for example, our hands a lot of our sensation and motor attention is on our hands, even though they comprise a pretty small part of our body. Our lips, our mouths, our face in general is also represented a lot in our brain. And I just think that sometimes your life, you think about it a little bit like a homunculus, where the big events in your life take up a big part of your memory, even though in time span there wasn't that much. So I do remember the age 21 to maybe 26 just being a good time, getting some independence, getting some money, traveling the world, coming back broke, doing it again. It was fun. But I always knew, I don't know how, but I always knew that going into medicine was my eventual place. And that's what ended up happening. There was nobody in my family per se that was a doctor. My grandma's mother, my great-grandmother, was an OBGYN in the turn of the last century in Ukraine. And she was the only close family member, if you will, that was in the medical profession. The story that I was told, and then I think I remember it as well, was shortly after we moved from my original home to my grandma's house in Israel. I was playing somewhere in another room and quiet and thinking about something, obviously, and my grandma, who was in a different room, remember that I came out and I declared that I'm going to be a brain surgeon. I never became a brain surgeon. I became a urologist, which some would argue is the male brain surgeon. So how did I get there? I'll tell you right now a little bit more. So here we are in about 2005 in the summer. I had a very fun single life type of summer. I went with my cousin and my friend to Thailand. We spent almost 2 months there. I also spent some time in Israel for my cousin's wedding there. And came back happy, fit, tan, and ready to take on medical school. So late August 2005, started orientation and then medical school. And I remember day 2, we are here in Long Island in the NYIT. Previously it was called NICOM. Medical school at Old Westbury, a DO school. And second day of orientation, I see these 2 girls, this cute one and friend, and I said to myself, wow, it'd be nice to get to know her. Of course, that became my wife. So Tanya was there with her friend Marina, who's my friend too now, and just very cool, cute girl. I didn't think too much of it at first, and we hung out as friends first, and then we began dating, and pretty much since September of 2005, we've been inseparable. We've been lucky to meet someone who, as the years continue, she seems to get better and better. You know, things that I never thought about when you initially meet a young lady. She was probably 23 at the time, maybe 24, maybe 22. No, she was 22, sorry. You know, you don't think, is she going to be a good mother? Is she going to, care about this when you're down and out? And the years have proven that she's more than I could have hoped for. So very lucky to have met her. We pretty much went through the entire med school curriculum together. And I remember Tanya coming into med school, saying that the only thing she does not want to do in terms of her specialty was be a dermatologist. Why? Because she had spent the summer before med school working in a dermatology office and said, well, I definitely don't want to do that. That's boring. That's stupid, something. Of course, she became a dermatologist. I had no idea what I wanted to do. At this point, I had some more guidance into the medical field because my dad in 1994 met a woman also named Tanya Vojtovic, who's been part of our life ever since. She's a wonderful, amazing woman who was an OBGYN back in Kharkiv in Ukraine. And when she came back here, when she emigrated to America around age 30, she eventually became a doctor here as well, family practitioner. And her daughter, Olga, became my sister. I became an older brother, which was very nice. I always felt like I wanted to have a younger sibling. So we got some advice from Tanya and other people in our lives about basically becoming specialists. Don't go into primary care, which is what my stepmom, Tanya, was doing. So we didn't really know what we wanted to do, but I do remember a very specific conversation, maybe second or third year of medical school, with an advisor. I think his name was Dr. Goldberg, something like that. He was a dentist who was working in the medical school. And we come to him as a couple. Tanya says, I want to go into dermatology. I say, I want to go into urology. And he just started laughing. He said, well, that's not going to happen. And then said, well, if it happens, you definitely won't. We live together. You won't be in the same place geographically. So nothing like telling you something can't be done to light a fire under your butt. And sure enough, we ended up proving Dr. Goldstein wrong. I'm sure he meant well. But why did I get into urology? So like I said, I had no idea what I wanted to do. First 2 years of medical school, you are in the classroom, you passing tests every month, you're doing an anatomy class, you are learning in the classroom setting. Third and fourth year of medical school is clinical. You go and you're in the hospitals, you're in the offices, you're seeing patients, you're helping in surgeries, things like that. So third year, first thing I started doing was surgery. I didn't know anything else, but it was exciting. We would help in the trauma setting. People would get shot, and medical students who don't know anything would go and help. Very exciting. Difficult, we would wake up at 3 a.m. and come home at 9 p.m. But I didn't know anything else. And the next few rotations I had were internal medicine and family practice, which were not exciting. And pretty soon after that, I realized I want to be some sort of surgeon. I did not like general surgery as much for different reasons and stumbled onto the field of urology, where I think nobody thinks before medical school, I'm going to go into urology. That's a strange declaration to be made, unless your family or somebody like that is a urologist. But the more I looked into urology, the more I realized it's surgical. And very interesting surgeries. We do open surgeries, laparoscopic, robotic surgeries, microsurgeries, endoscopic surgeries. And you get to see old, young, middle-aged. You get to treat life-threatening conditions. You get to treat lifestyle, elective conditions. It's really the most diverse field. And all the people I met in the field were hilarious. Everybody had a good sense of humor. We had a lot of access to penis jokes, which was one of our favorite things time and time again. So I became interested in it. I worked hard to be accepted and eventually got accepted at Philadelphia in a hospital called Albert Einstein Medical Center in North Philadelphia. And that's where I spent my next 5 years. Tanya, in the meantime, was accepted to an internship in Philadelphia, and then she ended up going fairly close to Philadelphia at Allentown to do her dermatology training. So I did my urology training until 2014. Tanya finished her residency in 2013, and then she spent a year in New York where she did a fellowship in dermatopathology. We lived together-ish. You know, she would come on weekends, sometimes on weekdays. I would also come visit her. But things were difficult but good. You know, I would work 80, 100 hours a week. Don't sleep much, you don't eat much, but you get to be friends with your co-residents, kind of like army buddies in the trenches of war. So it was a good time. It was a good time. The end of residency, I had to decide what to do. That was something that I didn't know. I liked urology in general, but I also knew I wanted to go back to New York City. Tanya wanted to go back to New York City, so I knew I wanted to do extra training, and I did a fellowship in Baltimore, Johns Hopkins, in andrology, sexual medicine, which was also a very good experience. I learned, you know, among one of the best institutions in urology in the world. I started taking some responsibilities as an attending without anybody to supervise you, which is good but also scary. And in Baltimore, Tanya and I had a great time. She was working, I was a fellow, and she got pregnant on purpose. And I remember we left Baltimore when she had a big old belly in June, and late August of 2015, she gave birth to Sebastian. And that was a crazy year for me. We finished fellowship, we moved to New York, became a father. I got my first job, first real job, I would say, in my life. And Tanya also had some health issues. So it was a very eventful year. And I think my life as it is now kind of started around then. It was, I think I had a lot of imposter syndrome. I wasn't sure if I knew anything about medicine, how to practice it, how to take care of patients. I also felt that I wasn't doing a good job as a father, as a husband. There was a lot of self-questioning, which has gotten better over the years. And I love my life the way it is. And thankfully in 2020, I became a dad again. We had another boy born, Aiden. His name is Aiden. And he was born on the Ides of March 15th, 2020. And for those of you who remember, that was right when COVID was really heating up. Maybe 2-3 days after he was born, the COVID pandemic, you know, really reached its peak. Everything shut down. If he was born a few days later, I wouldn't have been able to see him in the hospital when he was born. And then we spent basically the next year sort of in seclusion. Tanya, me, Sebastian, and Aiden living together. It was very strange times. We call Sebastian Bash, and a lot of times we call him Bashik. And Aiden's middle name was Joseph, so we call him AJ. It was a strange time. A couple of months after he was born, AJ, the entire hospital I work in, Maimonides in Brooklyn, became a COVID center, and there would be overflowing with patients sick, dying, and they had to have every doctor in the hospital, whether you were a specialist in infectious diseases or pulmonary expert or not, it didn't matter, urologists too. We're helping everybody. You know, I remember there was trucks full of corpses of people that passed away, and we had no idea what was going to happen. I remember preparing to leave to go live in a hotel nearby the hospital and start helping, thinking that there was a good chance I'd never come back. And much like I think now, like, oh, I'm too young to have my life end. I thought that way at that time. I was 41 at the time. But I also thought, if it's time, it's time. And I'm proud of who I have been. And if it had to happen, I was ready to, go away. Obviously, I didn't die. I didn't end up having anything serious happen. And things have been good since then. It's hard for me to think what they're like because they're still developing. But I think of myself now as a urologist, also a husband, a father. I also very much enjoy teaching urology residents. These are people who are doing their training after medical school to become urologists. I've had the privilege of graduating a few classes, and I think of them as my work children, and I have my home children, Bashik and AJ. I think that the older I get, the more I appreciate people in my life, such as my dad. Being a father is... I try to emulate him. He had no one to emulate. He did not have a father growing up. And seeing how he was and realizing things that he made look effortless were obviously very full of effort. And trying to do my best. It's humbling. Thinking about my grandma and how many challenges she faced. Not sure if I would be up for the same challenge, but sort of grateful that they made life a little bit easier for me. I want to share a few pictures, show a little bit of my family. Also, my grandma, she wrote in Russian, a book, "Бури и хамсины моей жизни," Storms and Hamsins of My Life. We got it translated to English. She wrote it in Russian, and also got it translated to Hebrew. So this is the original. "Бури и хамсины моей жизни," "Hasarot ve'hamsinim shel chayai," and "Storms and Hamsins of My Life." It's basically an autobiography, but we feature prominently in it, my sister and I. We have a good friend who's passed away. His name is Yuri Krasny. He's an artist who agreed to do little doodles and little pictures throughout in the book. I remember he would come over to my grandma's. He had severe Parkinson's at that time, and he was shaking a lot. But he would just take a napkin and a pen, and while my grandma was talking, he would do these shaky lines. And they looked like my grandma. I don't know how he did it. I guess because he's an artist. But here is Yankel Berka. This is my grandma's dad. He was a prominent Jew in Odessa. He built one of the first synagogues there, apparently. This is my grandma's mother, Rosa or Bella. She was the gynecologist I mentioned before. Here is my grandma's dad. This is my grandma, Babushka Sara. This is her brother who passed away in World War II. And this is my great-grandma, Rosa. This is my grandma with her sister, Fira. She passed away not long ago. and Grisha, and this is the entire mishpucha. I want to fast forward a little bit and show you some. This is my babushka as an adult. She's a fervent communist at this point. Later became anti-communist. This is who I'm named after. Jacob is a physicist. He was about 6'1", which is very tall, especially for that time. Nobody in my family has gotten that height, but he was a handsome man, apparently. Not sure if anybody else got that from the family. This is Grisha, who passed away early in World War II. My grandma told me that the Stalin government had the bright idea of having motorcycle scouts go to the front lines and look around and give all the information, and pretty much every single motorcycle scout, such as Grisha, were killed immediately. Here I am. This is maybe a couple of years after coming to America. That's me. And this is my sister Rachel. This is my grandma's third husband. His name is Lev Chekver. And my grandma took his name. He was an American citizen, which is how my grandma started coming to America. And that's how we had somewhere to come to after the divorce. This is my dad, maybe 16, 17 years old, back in Russia. And I have other pictures on my phone that my grandma didn't live to see my kids. She lived to see my sister's kid, Eva. She was born, and my grandma was able to hold her and see her the year that she passed. I'll show a few more pictures, but I think that one of the things I like in terms of our family traditions is that pretty much every Friday we meet up. This is something my grandma started for Shabbat dinner. We were never observant Jews. We don't keep kosher, and we're not sure even about God or anything like that, but we enjoy having Shabbat dinner together. Sometimes we'll have Chinese food or pork chops, but it's still a Shabbat dinner, if you will. And I have me and my family come, my dad with his wife Tanya. We have my sister Rachel, my stepsister Olga. They all come with their significant others and kids. And I would say 8 or 9 times out of 10, we're spending Friday dinner together, which is something my grandma started and continues at my dad's house, and probably one day it'll continue in either my house or Rachel's or Olga's. So I'll show you a couple more pictures from my childhood if you want. Here's some pictures. Here's my wife and I getting married. We got married overlooking Manhattan. I should know the date or else my wife will kill me. No, it's 2009. Here is, this is my babushka. It's a little video of her talking to my wife, Tanya. My grandma is my wife. This is back when we were 23, 20-something. My grandma really liked my girlfriend at the time, Tanya, because she was also from Odessa. So as soon as she found out that she was from Odessa, that's my sister, that's her ex-husband. As soon as my grandma found out that Tanya's from Odessa, she knew that she was a keeper before I even knew. Here's a picture. My dad, this is probably 1982 or so. That's me and that's my sister. Here's another picture. Us kind of enjoying nature back in Israel. Here is Fat Baby, that's me. and my sister's holding me. She's 5 years old or so, and I'm a few months old. That's my mother. We're not very close, but we're reestablishing contact. This is the picture I'm proud of. This is my stepsister Olya marrying Micah, and that guy in the background is me. I've actually officiated their wedding, or helped officiate their wedding, and I've married 6 or 7 other couples over the years. They've all stayed married except for one. This is my grandma from my mother's side, Genya. Not very close to her, but everybody said I look like her. In the family, I always make fun that my ears look like hers, whatever that means. And this is us maybe a few months after coming to America. This is in the same building that my dad is currently still living in. That's me and my sister and my friend Ben, who is my oldest friend. I've known him since 1986, 85, something like that. Here's Tanya and I with Sebastian, the joy of my life. Here he is, a little blonde kid with my wife and my dad and Tanya, my stepmom. Want to show my sister and I actually remember when we took this picture. This was at my grandma's place, maybe 2 months before we left Israel. Sort of one of the last photos of innocence, I believe. And here I am with my 2 boys, AJ and Sebastian. They're both sweet, sweet children. My oldest boy, is such a good brother, and always taking care of his little brother, who was diagnosed with autism. So it's been a little challenging, but he's lucky to have a big brother like that. And of course, Lo's mama, very lucky to have his mama. Look at that smile. So that's my life now. One last thing. This is, for those of you who speak Russian, this is fukale. You know fukale? Was blowing raspberries into the belly. So my younger son is doing it to my older son, and then running to see the video of it. So my life is right now dominated with family life, work life. I don't know what's in the future. I do know that I've started doing a couple of things in media. About a year ago, less than a year ago, I appeared on the Drew Barrymore show. I did a vasectomy live on TV. That was definitely a fun experience. My resident and I were doing it together, and the patient, who was a doctor, was very kind to sacrifice his body for media. And I've been doing health segments on Fox 5 News a couple times a month, just talking about current medical events. And enjoying it. I don't know what's in the future. Talking to a camera now, maybe that's something that I'll continue to do here and there. So things are good. They're not perfect, but you gotta find the beauty in the chaos, and I'm getting better at that.